I never expected my life to unravel into the kind of messy, emotionally draining chaos you'd hear in an AITA story with millions of views, but that's exactly what happened. One moment I thought I was building a future with a woman I trusted, and the next I was holding a truth so sharp it cut through every belief I had about loyalty and love. My girlfriend, who had always insisted she was infertile, showed up at my door trembling, holding a pregnancy test and whispering that she was shocked. If that revelation had stood alone, maybe I could have tried to understand, but life rarely deals only one blow. The second hit came when she admitted the baby might not be mine. And the third, the one that shattered everything I thought I knew, was learning the possible father was Dylan, my childhood best friend, practically my brother. My name is Evan. I grew up in a small Minnesota town where information spreads faster than weather changes, and everyone knows the details of your life before you've even processed them yourself. In that tight-knit world, Dylan had always been my anchor. We met when we were 6, bonded over broken bicycles, scrapes, fishing trips, and the belief that best friends were supposed to be lifelong. We promised each other, half serious, half childish, that nothing would ever come between us. For most of my life, I truly believed that. If anyone had asked me a year ago who I trusted most, his name would have been the first I said. Then came Marissa. I met her 2 years ago at a small house gathering. She wasn't loud or attention-seeking. She had a gentle way of speaking that made you feel like the only person in the room. What hooked me was how easy it felt to be around her. We fell into a relationship naturally. Movie nights on my couch, slow walks under the streetlights, late-night talks about goals and fears, quiet dinners at the old diner near the train tracks. She had a warmth that made me think about settling down in a way I never had before. Nothing felt forced, and nothing felt rushed. At some point early on, she told me she was infertile due to a hormonal condition. She said it casually, as though it was something she had long accepted. I didn't push the topic. I told her kids weren't a deal-breaker for me, and she looked relieved. Now, that conversation echoes in my mind with a completely different tone, but at the time it felt honest, intimate even. I never imagined someone would lie about something so sensitive. Over time, what made me happiest was how well she got along with Dylan. The three of us spent so many nights together: board games, football, beer runs, spontaneous late-night snacks. I felt lucky that the two people closest to me connected so naturally. I thought it was a sign that everything in my life was falling into place, but slowly, little things became strange. At first it was harmless, inside jokes I didn't understand, quick glances they exchanged, short conversations they ended the moment I walked into the room. I told myself not to overthink. I didn't want to be the paranoid boyfriend. Then came the night I stopped by Dylan's house after work to get dinner. He didn't answer. Hours later I saw a photo of him and Marissa at a bar smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. They claimed they had texted me, but there were no messages on my phone. I brushed it off as a misunderstanding, but that was only the beginning. More signs piled up, unexplained calls, sudden changes in plans. Marissa stepping outside to take work calls. Dylan always vanishing when I tried to hang out but somehow available when she needed help with something trivial. Still, I said nothing. I tried convincing myself that my mind was playing tricks on me until the day Marissa showed up gripping that pregnancy test. She looked pale, her voice shaking, her eyes darting around like she was searching for a version of me who wouldn't question anything. When she whispered, "Evan, I'm pregnant," something deep inside me went cold. Not angry yet, not even betrayed, just cold. A feeling I couldn't explain. She said maybe it was a miracle, maybe her doctor had been wrong. But a part of me, the part I'd been ignoring for months, finally woke up. Something wasn't right, and that day, standing in my doorway holding the biggest shock of my life, I didn't know it yet, but the real storm hadn't even begun. After the shock of the pregnancy announcement settled into my bones, the silence between us grew heavy, like we were both waiting for the truth to crawl out on its own. It didn't take long. A few days later Marissa showed up again, but this time her eyes were red, her voice trembling, and she looked like someone who had been rehearsing a confession over and over in the mirror. She sat on my couch, twisting her hands until her knuckles turned white, and finally whispered the words that punched the air out of my lungs. "The baby might not be yours." She said it like she expected me to comfort her, like her betrayal deserved sympathy. She explained she'd been stressed, drank too much, made a mistake, a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment. All the classic lines you hear in stories where someone tries to downplay something that is, in reality, like a change in. And then she said the name Dylan, my best friend, my brother in every way except blood. Hearing her say his name in that context was like someone had picked up a needle and scratched straight across the record of my life. I stared at her, my mind flipping through memories of the three of us together, searching for signs I'd missed. Every laugh, every shared glance, every inside joke I wasn't part of it all rearranged itself into something darker, something I couldn't unsee anymore. I needed answers, so I went to Dylan, hoping, some part of me still hoping, that he'd deny it, or at least show shame. But he opened the door with this annoyed look, like I was interrupting him. And when I confronted him, he shrugged. "It just happened, man. We didn't mean for it to." Those were his words, casual, detached, as if cheating on your best friend with his girlfriend was something accidental, like knocking over a glass of water. When I pressed him, asked how long, how many times, he muttered, 3, maybe 4 times. But his eyes told the truth. This wasn't a handful of drunken mistakes. This was deliberate, repeated, hidden. I left feeling hollow, but it got worse. Within days, they both began approaching me not to apologize, not to make amends, but to talk about responsibility. They started hinting that I should step up financially because I had the stable job, that I was the more reliable one, that the baby deserved a solid future, and I was the best option to provide that. They spoke as if the situation was logical, as if loyalty demanded I fix a mess they created behind my back. Marissa became strangely curious about my finances. She asked about my savings, my credit score, how much I had in my emergency fund, how soon I wanted to buy a house. The questions weren't subtle. It was like she was mentally calculating what she'd gain if I accepted the role she wanted me to play. Meanwhile, Dylan tried sending me friendly messages, pretending nothing was wrong like he thought. A couple of jokes or sports updates would magically erase the betrayal. The worst moment came when Marissa used the spare key one had once trusted her with and let herself into my apartment. She broke down crying, packing her belongings dramatically as if she wanted me to stop her. She said she still loved me, that the baby would be better off with me, that we could co-parent regardless of biology. She tried to paint herself as someone who had just made a mistake and deserved grace. But when I asked her directly, "Why did you lie about being infertile?" her mask slipped. She admitted she had exaggerated what her doctor said. She told me she wanted me to stop worrying about protection, to feel safe with her, to think long-term. In her own words, she wanted the relationship to move faster. What that really meant was that she manipulated my trust from the beginning. Then Dylan asked to talk man to man. I went, hoping for a moment of maturity, maybe even remorse. Instead, the two of them sat together, telling me that since Dylan wasn't financially stable and Marissa was overwhelmed, I should step up. They spoke about being the bigger person, about doing the right thing, about how love doesn't depend on DNA. Their entitlement was staggering. It was like they saw me not as a human being but as a solution, a convenient safety net to catch the consequences of their actions. Walking out of that conversation, something inside me solidified. The disbelief faded, the shock simmered down, and beneath it all grew a clearer, sharper realization. They weren't sorry. They didn't feel guilty. They weren't asking, they were planning to build a future on my resources while they hid their betrayal behind excuses. That night, for the first time in months, I stopped questioning myself. I stopped trying to rationalize their behavior. Instead, I saw the truth. If I didn't protect myself now, I would lose everything: my peace, my finances, my future, because they fully expected me to carry the weight of a child that might not even be mine. And in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't heartbreak. It was clarity. This was not a situation I could talk my way through. This was a situation I needed to fight my way out of. The moment I realized I needed to protect myself, everything about the situation snapped into harsh focus. I wasn't just dealing with emotional betrayal anymore. I was staring at a potential legal trap that could lock me into an 18-year financial commitment for a child who might not even share my DNA. That thought alone made my stomach twist. I needed someone who understood the legal stakes better than I did. So I called the one person in my family who had spent years dealing with messy situations like this, my uncle, a seasoned family law attorney who had seen every kind of relationship disaster imaginable. When I finished explaining everything, he didn't react with shock or judgment. His voice stayed calm, steady, and firm in a way that made me realize how serious this truly was. "Evan," he said, "do not sign anything. Do not acknowledge paternity, and change your locks immediately." Those 3 sentences told me more than any emotional conversation could have. If I made a single mistake, even something as simple as appearing to involve DI, I could be held legally responsible for someone else's child. His warning confirmed the fear I had been trying to ignore. This wasn't just manipulation. It was strategy, so I followed his advice. I changed my locks the same night. When Marissa came over the next morning to talk, she panicked when her key didn't work. She texted me in long, frantic paragraphs accusing me of abandoning her, of being cold, of punishing her during a vulnerable moment. Dylan chimed in with a message claiming I was acting out of character, telling me I was letting rage cloud my judgment. The irony was suffocating to people who had betrayed me, lecturing me about morals and responsibilities. Still, I stayed calm. I told them both that nothing would move forward without a prenatal paternity test. For the first time, they hesitated. They threw excuses. "It's too stressful. It's unnecessary. We should focus on what's important," but I refused to budge. Finally, I told them that if they continued resisting, my lawyer would step in. That shut them up instantly. The day of the test felt surreal. Marissa arrived acting fragile, leaning on every chair she passed, wearing an expression that hovered between martyrdom and exhaustion. Dylan stayed close to her side, pretending to be protective, but I could see the fear lurking behind his eyes. Neither of them looked like people fighting for the truth. They looked like people fighting to delay it. But the test was done, the sample collected, and there was no stopping what came next while waiting for the results. The two of them launched a smear campaign so absurd it would have been laughable if it hadn't involved my reputation. Marissa told mutual friends that I was abandoning her during pregnancy. Dylan told people I refused to take accountability. A few friends confronted me, parroting their words. I didn't argue. I simply said, wait for the truth. My uncle told me not to engage, not to justify anything, and definitely not to let guilt push me into involvement, so I kept my distance. Then, fate handed me a gift I wasn't expecting. One afternoon I found Marissa's old phone at my apartment, the same one she replaced months ago. She must have forgotten it behind my dresser. I assumed it would be locked, but when I pressed the home button it opened immediately. I told myself I would only check enough to protect myself legally. But the moment I saw the notifications and message threads, the world around me blurred. There were hundreds of messages between her and Dylan, not a few weeks worth, months, long conversations filled with secrets, inside jokes, late-night confessions, and flirtation that scorched my eyes, screenshots of plans they made, voice notes, photos, even conversations discussing me mocking, musing words they'd never dare say to my face. The worst part wasn't the cheating itself. It was the calculated discussions about the pregnancy, messages about how I was financially stable, how Dylan couldn't handle a kid right now, how I was the safest option. They talked about me like I wasn't a person at all, just a resource. I took screenshots of everything, every message, every timestamp, every whisper of their plan. I forwarded everything to my uncle. He responded in minutes, save everything, don't engage. When the results come in, we move. Waiting for the test results felt agonizing, but when they finally arrived, the tension in my body snapped. I opened the email and read the line 3 times just to be sure. Probability of paternity, 0%. I wasn't the father. Relief washed through me so suddenly I felt lightheaded. Then came something else, and not the explosive, yelling kind. A quiet, sharp, steady anger that felt like finally stepping into clarity after being lost in fog for months. I sent the result to both of them with no comment. Dylan called immediately, stumbling through excuses that made no sense. We were confused, he said. We didn't think it'd go this far. I hung up. Marissa sent paragraphs filled with guilt, nostalgia, manipulation, little emotional hooks designed to reel me back in. I ignored them all. My uncle arranged a meeting in his office. When Marissa and Dylan walked in, their bravado disappeared. They sat down across from me looking terrified. My uncle placed all the printed evidence on the table, the messages, the timelines, the paternity results. Watching their faces drain of color was the closest thing to justice I had felt in months. My uncle calmly explained the legal consequences if they attempted to list me as the father, harass me, or continue spreading lies. They tried to justify themselves, stress, confusion, emotions, but none of it mattered. The truth was in black and white, undeniable and irreversible. When the meeting ended, I stood up, walked past them, and didn't look back. The weight I'd been carrying for months finally slipped off my shoulders. For the first time, I felt free. Walking out of my uncle's office felt like stepping out of a storm cellar after a tornado has ripped through your entire town. For months I had been trapped in a maze of manipulation, guilt, and emotional chaos. But with the truth exposed, every message, every lie, every piece of evidence laid bare, the air felt clearer, colder, and somehow lighter. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel vengeful. I felt released, like I had finally walked out of a burning building I didn't realize I'd been living in. The days that followed were strangely quiet. No explosions, no dramatic confrontations, just silence, a silence that felt both healing and eerie. For the first time in months, Marissa didn't show up at my door. Dylan didn't text. No guilt trips, no manipulative paragraphs. Just the sound of my life slowly resetting itself. At first, people around town didn't know what had happened. They'd only heard the rumors Marissa and Dylan had spread earlier, the narrative where I was a heartless man abandoning a pregnant woman. But after the meeting at the lawyer's office, the story shifted. People saw the truth. Screenshots circulated privately. Mutual friends contacted me, some apologizing for believing the lies, others stunned into silence when they learned how calculated everything had been. Even people who didn't know me well began treating me differently, as if they had dodged a bullet themselves by witnessing the fallout. Dylan disappeared from social gatherings entirely. He stopped posting online, stopped hanging around the usual places. His family, people who had watched me grow up, reached out one by one. His mother sent a long voice message saying she was ashamed of his behavior, that she didn't raise him to betray a friend like that. His sister, someone I had always been close to, apologized on his behalf even though she had no reason to. It was surreal to watch the consequences ripple outward, affecting people who had nothing to do with the mess he made. As for Marissa, she moved back in with relatives a few towns over. The trust she once had from people vanished overnight. Nobody wanted to be involved with the drama. Nobody wanted to offer support built on deception. I didn't celebrate her downfall, but I didn't pity her either. She had built her future on manipulation, and now she was facing the collapse of the structure she'd created. Her pregnancy was no longer a symbol of hope to her, just a reminder of a plan that backfired spectacularly. My parents were relieved more than I expected. My dad simply nodded when I told him everything was over. "Good," he said. "Some storms aren't meant to be waited out." My mom cried softly when she heard the details. Not out of sadness for what I'd lost, but out of relief for what I had avoided. She told me she had been afraid I'd get trapped, afraid the situation would claim years of my life I could never get back. I started taking better care of myself. I slept. I went to the gym. I reconnected with friends who genuinely cared about me. I realized just how emotionally suffocating the past months had been. The lies, the gaslighting, the pressure, the expectation that I shouldered the consequences of actions I had no part in. Now that the weight had lifted, I could finally breathe fully again. People occasionally asked if I would ever forgive them. Forgive Marissa. Forgive Dylan. But forgiveness isn't something I owe anyone, and it's not something you give just because time passes. Some betrayals carve too deep, especially when they're premeditated. Maybe years from now I'll feel differently, but right now, the answer is no. They didn't just hurt me, they tried to reshape my entire future, tried to chain me to a lie, tried to make me responsible for something built on deceit. The child, however, was never the enemy. I don't resent that baby. That baby didn't choose any of this. I hope Dylan steps up. I hope Marissa finds a way to raise the child in an environment built on honesty instead of manipulation. But none of that is my burden to carry. My responsibility ends where their lies begin. Now, whenever I replay everything in my mind, the shock, the excuses, the manipulation, the evidence, the collapse, I find myself asking the same question people online always ask at the end of these stories. It's a question I once asked myself in panic before I knew the truth. A question others threw at me when they only heard one side. And now that everything is out in the open, now that I've protected myself, stood my ground, and walked away with my future intact, I can finally ask it clearly in all of this. Was I really the asshole?